Rhythmic, nervous tapping of his pen against the mahogany desk, a metronome counting down seconds he would never get back. He loosened his tie, the silk slipping through his fingers like water, cool and smooth, but the knot of tension in his chest remained tight, unyielding, a physical manifestation of the burden he carried alone. It was 3 a.m, the hour when the world was most honest, stripped of its daytime pretenses. The merger documents lay spread before him like a battlefield map, red ink marking the points of contention, black ink sealing the fate of thousands of employees who depended on his signature. He picked up his coffee cup, cold now, the liquid thick and stagnant, and took a sip anyway. The bitterness grounded him, a sharp shock to the system that reminded him he was still awake, still functioning. Success was not a destination. It was a treadmill that accelerated every time he thought he could slow down, a relentless machine that demanded fuel in the form of sleep, health, and presence. He had built this empire brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and quiet evenings for this view, for this specific angle of the city that proved he had made it. But as he looked out at the sleeping metropolis, a cold whisper of doubt curled around his spine, icy and unwelcome. What if it wasn't enough? What if the market shifted tomorrow with the opening bell? What if the foundation he had spent 20 years building was actually sand, waiting for the first strong tide to wash it away? The fear was not of poverty, not really, but of irrelevance, of being the man who lost it all when everyone was watching. The phone on the desk vibrated, shattering the silence like a stone thrown through a window. Arthur stared at the screen, the light buzzing against the dark wood. Marcus, his chief financial officer. He took a breath, steadying his voice, smoothing the exhaustion from his throat before swiping to answer. He needed to sound invincible, even when he felt like crumbling. Arthur. Marcus's voice was crisp, laden with static and urgency, echoing slightly in the quiet room. The Tokyo branch just sent over the revised figures. There's a discrepancy in the asset's valuation. If we sign tomorrow, we're exposed. Arthur leaned forward, pressing his palms flat against the cool desk, feeling the grain of the wood under his skin. Exposed how much? Give me the number, Marcus. Enough to drop the stock by 15% by noon, Marcus replied, the gravity of the statement hanging in the air. The board is getting nervous. They're calling me. They're asking if you're sure about the timeline. They want to know if you're compromised. Tell them I'm always sure, Arthur said, his voice harder than he intended, sharp enough to cut. He closed his eyes for a second, seeing not the dark behind his lids, but the face of his wife, Elena. She had asked him last week if he would be there for the ultrasound, her voice soft and hopeful. He had promised. He hadn't made it. He had sent flowers instead. Fix the valuation, Marcus. I don't care if you have to wake the auditors in Zurich. I don't care if you have to fly there yourself. Make it work. Arthur, you sound exhausted. Maybe you should let Sarah handle the closing ceremony. You haven't slept in 2 days, Marcus suggested, a hint of genuine concern slipping through the professional veneer, a crack in the armor. No, Arthur snapped, then softened, rubbing his temples with his free hand. No, I need to be there. This is too big to delegate. If this fails, Marcus, it's not just numbers. It's everything. It's the security of every person who works for us. It's my legacy. Understood. I'll have the corrected files by 6. Get some rest, Arthur. Please. The line went dead. Arthur lowered the phone, placing it face down on the desk as if it were hot. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before, pressing against his eardrums. Everything. What did that word mean anymore? Did it include the home waiting for him across the city, warm and lit by the hallway nightlight? Did it include the life growing inside Elena, the 4 heartbeats that doctors said were strong and steady? He walked around the desk, his shoes clicking softly on the polished floor, the sound echoing like gunshots in the empty suite. He stopped by the window again, pressing his forehead against the cool glass, seeking the chill to calm the heat rising in his cheeks. The city lights blurred slightly, streaking into long lines of gold. He wasn't crying, he told himself firmly. It was just the fatigue, the strain on the optic nerve. Men like him did not cry over spreadsheets. His personal phone buzzed in his pocket, a second vibration that felt like a judgment. He pulled it out, hoping it was Marcus with good news, a miracle solution. But the glow of the screen revealed a message from Elena. Are you coming home? The babies are kicking. I wanted you to feel. It's quiet here. Arthur's thumb hovered over the screen, the glass cool against his skin. The words seemed to burn him, simple and devastating. He could picture her there, in the dim light of their bedroom, hand resting on her stomach, waiting for a door to open that remained shut. He could imagine the silence she spoke of, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but the heavy silence of absence. He wanted to type back. He wanted to say, "I'm leaving now. I'm coming. I'll be there in 20 minutes." But the stack of papers on the desk seemed to shout louder than the message, a physical barrier between him and his family. The fear of failure, that ancient, gnawing beast in his gut, roared to life. It whispered that if he left now, if he lost focus, the deal could slip. If the deal slipped, the security he was building for them would vanish. He remembered the winter he was 10, the heating turned off, the silence of his own mother worrying over bills. He had sworn then that no one he loved would ever feel that cold again. He was working for them. Every hour here was an hour of safety for them. That was the logic he used to build the wall between his work and his heart, brick by logical brick. He typed a reply, his fingers feeling clumsy, large and inadequate for the delicacy of the moment. "Close the deal first. For us. I love you." He hit send before he could change it, before he could admit that he was afraid. He knew it wasn't enough. He knew that love wasn't measured in wire transfers or stock options, but in presence, in the warmth of a hand held in the dark. But the fear was a stronger motivator than guilt. It was a fuel that never ran out. He turned away from the window, walking back to the chair that felt more like a throne than a seat of rest, high-backed and imposing. He sat down, the leather creaking under his weight, and pulled the documents closer. The numbers swam before his eyes, rows of data that represented people's livelihoods, his legacy, his worth. He picked up his pen again. The weight of it was familiar, extensions of his own hand. He signed the preliminary approval, the ink flowing dark and permanent, binding him further to the path he had chosen. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, a lonely sound echoing off the skyscrapers, rising and falling like a breath. Arthur didn't look up. He couldn't. If he looked up, he might see the emptiness of the room. He might realize that the empire he was building had no one to share it with if he wasn't careful, that a castle filled with gold but empty of laughter was just a vault. But that was a thought for another day, a luxury he could not afford tonight. Today, there was only the work. Today, there was only the need to be invincible, to be the shield that blocked every uncertainty from reaching his family. He took another sip of the cold coffee. It tasted like ash, bitter and stale. He swallowed it anyway, forcing it down. The city continued to breathe below, indifferent to his struggle, millions of people dreaming while he stood guard over their futures. Arthur opened the next file, the paper crisp under his fingers. His eyes burned, dry and gritty, feeling like sand had been rubbed into them, but he forced them to stay open. He would sleep when the world was secure. He would rest when he knew, absolutely knew, that nothing could take this away from Elena and the children. Until then, the office was his home, and the silence was his only companion, a loyal dog that never asked for more than he could give. He worked on, driven by a love that had twisted into something rigid and demanding, bound by the years that were just beginning to count down, ticking away in the corners of the room. The clock on the wall ticked forward, second by second, a mechanical heartbeat marking the time he was giving to the company, and the time he was stealing from his family, a debt he promised himself he would repay someday. He didn't look at the clock. He just kept writing, signing, building, hoping numbers. The air in the delivery room was thick with a different kind of tension, humid and heavy with the scent of antiseptic and impending life. Elena lay back against the pillows, the white sheets pulled up to her waist, her skin pale and shimmering with a fine layer of sweat that caught the sterile overhead lights. The monitors surrounding her bed beeped in a rhythmic chorus, for distinct lines dancing across the screens, representing the 4 heartbeats that fluttered inside her, fragile and fast like birds trapped in a cage. A contraction rolled through her, not like a wave this time, but like a tide pulling her under, crushing the air from her lungs until her vision spotted with gray. She gripped the side rails of the bed, her knuckles turning white, the metal cold against her burning palms. "Breathe, Elena, just breathe," the nurse said, her voice soft but firm, a steady anchor in the storm. She adjusted the 4 drip, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "You're doing incredibly well. The doctor is preparing for the C-section. We need to get them out safely." Elena nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. She turned her head slightly, the movement exhausting, to look at the empty chair beside her bed. It was upholstered in a dull blue fabric, worn at the edges, waiting for a weight that hadn't arrived. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. It was 4 a.m. Arthur had said he would try. He had said he would be there. But the phone on the bedside table remained dark, silent, a black mirror reflecting nothing but her own anxiety. She knew where he was. She could picture him in his tower, surrounded by glass and shadows, fighting wars she couldn't see. A sharp pang of resentment pierced through the pain, hot and sudden, but she pushed it down. There was no room for anger here, not when 4 lives depended on her stability. She had to be the calm center. She had to be enough for all of them. Is he? Elena whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The nurse Sarah knew. She had seen this before. The husbands lost in the labyrinth of their own ambitions, arriving only when the crying had stopped. Sarah paused, her eyes meeting Elena's with a gentle sympathy that felt like a warm blanket. He's not here yet, honey. But you don't need him to do this. You are strong. Look at you. You're growing a whole team in there. Elena managed a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. A team, she repeated softly. I just hope he realizes what he's missing. Another contraction hit, harder than the last, stealing her breath, forcing her to close her eyes and focus on the rhythm of the machines. Beep, beep, beep. For lives. For reasons to keep holding on. She thought about the promise they had made, the pact before the fertility treatments, before the injections and the hope. He would provide the security, she would provide the home. But as the pain radiated through her hips, she wondered if security was worth this silence. Was a trust fund worth an empty chair at the birth of his own children? The anesthesiologist stepped forward, his mask covering the lower half of his face, his eyes kind above the fabric. Elena, we're ready to move you to the operating room. We need to hurry. One of the heart rates is dipping slightly. It's likely nothing, but we don't take chances with quadruplets. Panic flared in her chest, bright and sharp. Dipping? Is he okay? Are they okay? She tried to sit up, but Sarah gently pushed her back down. We are being cautious, the doctor said, his voice calm, designed to soothe. You need to stay calm for them. Your stress affects them. We are going to take excellent care of you all. They wheeled her out of the room, the wheels squeaking on the polished linoleum, the sound echoing down the long, empty corridor. The lights overhead blurred as they moved quickly, a tunnel of white fluorescence. Elena kept her hand on her stomach, even though the surgical drape would soon separate her from the sight of them. She needed to feel them, to know they were still there. As they crossed the threshold into the operating room, the air grew colder, chilled to preserve sterility. She shivered, and a warm blanket was tucked around her shoulders, but the cold inside her remained. Arthur, she whispered again, this time to herself. She reached for her phone with a trembling hand before they covered her arms. She opened the messaging app. Her thumb hovered over his name. She wanted to call him. She wanted to scream at him to come. But she knew if she called, he would answer with the phone pressed between his shoulder and ear, his mind half on a spreadsheet, half on her. She didn't want that version of him here. She wanted the father, not the magnate. And if he couldn't be the father right now, she would have to be both. She typed a message, her fingers shaking. They're coming now. Surgery starting. I am scared. I wish you were holding my hand. She read it over, the words stark and vulnerable on the screen. Then she deleted the last sentence. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't show him the weakness he might interpret as a liability. She typed instead, surgery starting. We'll update when they are here. She hit send. The little circle spun for a moment, then the message was delivered. Read receipts were off. She wouldn't know if he saw it. She put the phone away, surrendering it to the nurse. Okay, Elena, the surgeon said, pulling up a stool. You'll feel pressure, but no pain. We're going to meet your babies. The world narrowed down to the sounds of instruments clinking against metal trays, the rustle of gowns, the low hum of the ventilation. Elena stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations to keep her mind from racing. 1, 2, 3. She thought about the nursery they had prepared at home, the 4 cribs lined up like soldiers, the soft yellow paint, the silence of the room waiting for noise. She had bought the clothes herself. She had folded the tiny socks herself. She had talked to them every night while Arthur was away, telling them about a father who loved them but was busy building a castle for them to live in. Would they understand? Would they forgive him? There's the first one, the doctor announced, his voice shifting into a tone of focused excitement. A cry pierced the air, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. Elena's breath hitched in her throat, a sob catching behind her ribs. Is he? Healthy, The nurse confirmed quickly, moving the infant to the warming station. Strong lungs. Then came the second, a moment later, a slightly deeper cry. Then the third and the fourth, each one joining the chorus until the room was filled with the sound of life demanding attention. Elena closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners and sliding into her hairline. She had done it. She had brought them into the world. But as the cries filled the room, the silence of her phone weighed heavier than the exhaustion in her bones. She listened for the door to open, for the rush of footsteps, for his voice asking if she was okay. But there was only the medical team, efficient and professional, cleaning, weighing, wrapping. 4 boys, the surgeon said, turning to look at her, his eyes smiling above the mask. They are beautiful, Elena. You did amazing. Can I see them? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Soon, Sarah said, leaning in close. Just let them stabilize. You need to rest. Elena lay there, the adrenaline fading, leaving her hollowed out and trembling. The operating room felt vast again, just like Arthur's office, but where his was cold with power, hers was cold with solitude. She had created a family in this room, a unit of 5, while the 6th member remained absent. The bond was already forming, invisible but unbreakable, woven from the pain she had endured alone and the fear she had swallowed without complaint. She realized then that the years ahead would not be about waiting for him to arrive. They would be about her holding the fort, about being the bridge between the father who built the world and the children who lived in it. Her phone buzzed on the tray table where Sarah had placed it. A single vibration. Elena turned her head slowly, straining against the constraints of the 4 lines. She couldn't reach it, but she saw the screen light up. A reply. She squinted, trying to read the preview text from across the room. Congratulations. Tell me when I can come. Deal is critical. The words blurred. Deal is critical. Not are you okay? Not I'm on my way. Just logistics. Just business. A fresh wave of pain washed over her, not physical this time, but a deep, aching sorrow that settled in her chest. She turned her head back to the ceiling, staring at the white tiles. She would not cry. Not here. Not when her children needed her strength. She took a deep breath, the air cold in her lungs. Bring them to me, she said, her voice stronger now, fortified by a new resolve. Please. I need to hold them. Sarah hesitated, looking at the doctor, who nodded. One by one, they brought the wrapped bundles to her, placing them gently on her chest where she could feel their warmth, their tiny movements against her skin. They were so small, so fragile, yet they breathed with a rhythm that drowned out the machines. Elena looked down at them, for faces red and scrunching, eyes closed against the light. She touched the cheek of the first one, then the second. You are mine, she whispered, the words meant for them, but also for herself. And I am yours. We don't need anyone else to be whole. The door to the operating room remained closed. Outside, the city continued to spin, and Arthur continued to sign papers, believing he was building a legacy. But in this room, under the harsh lights, the true legacy was being defined. It wasn't in the bank accounts or the mergers. It was in the way Elena held her 4 sons, protecting them from the cold, promising them silently that she would be the warmth he couldn't provide. The years that would bind them together were starting now, not with a celebration, but with a quiet, fierce determination. She kissed the forehead of the closest baby, smelling the scent of new life, sweet and milky. She would love them enough for both of them. She would be the anchor. And when Arthur finally arrived, if he ever did, he would find a family that had learned to stand without him. A unit so tight-knit that he would have to work harder than any merger to find his place within it. The monitors beeped on, a steady rhythm of survival, marking the time not in seconds or minutes, but in moments of calm abdomen that served as a constant reminder of what she had endured. The babies were in the nursery nearby, stable and warm, monitored by machines that beeped with a reassuring rhythm she could hear through the open door. She turned her head toward the window, where the sun was beginning to bleed into the sky, painting the horizon in shades of bruised purple and soft orange. Another day had begun for the world, but for her, time had fractured. She checked her phone again. No new messages. The last one sent was still there, read but unanswered. She put the phone down on the bedside table, the screen facing down, as if hiding it would hide the disappointment. The door opened slowly, the hinge squeaking softly, and Arthur stepped in. He looked nothing like the titan of industry who commanded boardrooms. He looked hollowed out, his suit wrinkled, his tie loosened and hanging askew, his eyes rimmed with red fatigue. He stopped just inside the threshold, his hand still on the doorknob, as if he needed the support to stay upright. He looked at her, then at the empty space beside her where he should have been hours ago. The air in the room shifted, charged with the electricity of his absence and the gravity of his presence now. He walked forward, his steps heavy, the leather of his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He stopped by the bed, looking down at her, his expression a mixture of relief and profound shame. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers before finally settling on her fingers. His skin was cold. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. The deal, it fell apart at the last minute. I had to fix it. I had to secure." "You secured it," she finished for him, her voice weak but steady. She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "You always secure it, Arthur. That was the agreement." He flinched, the words hitting him with physical force. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, the metal legs scraping loudly against the floor. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands for a moment before looking up at her. "Don't do that. Don't make it sound like a transaction. I did this for them. For you. So they would never want for anything. So you would never have to worry about a bill, about a future, about safety." Elena turned her head to look at him fully, the movement costing her energy she didn't have. "Do you remember the night we decided to try for the IVF? The night we sat on the balcony and looked at this same city?" She paused, waiting for him to nod. He did, his eyes locked on hers, wary. "You told me that you could give them the world, Arthur. You said, 'I will build the fortress, you build the home.' That was the pact. You would ensure the financial empire was unshakable, and I would ensure the family was whole. I held up my end. I carried them. I birthed them. I did it alone in that room while you were securing the fortress." Arthur stood up abruptly, the chair scraping back again. He walked to the window, turning his back to her, looking out at the city he claimed to own. "I know," he whispered, his reflection ghostly against the glass. "I know I wasn't here. But if I hadn't been there, if I had walked away from that table, the stock would have tanked. The security I promised you, it would have vanished. I was protecting the promise, Elena. I was protecting the future we agreed on. But who protects the present?" she asked, the question hanging in the sterile air. "The pact was about roles, Arthur. It wasn't about absence. We said we would be partners. You forgot the partnership part. You thought you could buy your share of the labor with wire transfers and security funds." She took a shallow breath, wincing as the pain flared. "I don't doubt you love them. I don't doubt you love me. But love isn't just provision. It's presence. And today the fortress was full, but the home was empty." Arthur turned around, his face etched with a pain that money couldn't soothe. He walked back to the bed, kneeling beside it this time, bringing himself lower than her, a gesture of submission. He took her hand again, holding it with both of his, trying to warm it. "I can fix this," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. "I will make it up. I'll take time off. I'll be there for everything from now on. Just don't shut me out. Don't tell me the pact was void. Tell me I can still be part of the home I was supposed to build." Elena looked down at him, at the man who had moved mountains to bring them here, yet stumbled over the simple act of being present. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear he had confessed years ago on the balcony, the fear of being poor, of being powerless. She understood it now, clearer than ever. He wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was absent because he cared too much about the safety net, forgetting that the net was useless if there was no one caught in it together. The years stretched out before them, long and uncertain. This was the first test of their bond, and it had nearly broken them before it truly began. "The pact stands," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "But the terms have changed. You can build the fortress, Arthur. But you have to live in the home too. You can't just send supplies from the outside. You have to come inside. The children, they won't know you as a provider. They will know you as a father or as a stranger. There is no middle ground." Arthur nodded, a single sharp movement. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against the mattress near her hand, closing his eyes. "I understand," he murmured into the sheets. "I understand." They stayed like that for a long time, the sun rising higher, casting long shadows across the room. The distance between them was still there, a chasm carved by missed moments and prioritized deals. But there was a bridge being built now, word by word, breath by breath. The pact had bound them together in purpose, but the years ahead would bind them in experience. Arthur lifted his head and looked toward the door leading to the nursery. "Can I see them?" he asked, his voice small. "Yes," Elena said, releasing his hand and gesturing toward the door. "Go. Meet them. But remember, Arthur, they don't need a provider right now. They just need you." He stood up, straightening his jacket, trying to compose himself, trying to shift from the businessman to the father. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. He looked back at her one last time, a silent promise passing between them that the next chapter would be different, that the years that bound them would be filled with more than just security. He stepped into the hallway, leaving Elena alone with the sunlight and the silence. She closed her eyes, listening to the beep of the monitor, feeling the ache in her body, knowing that the hard work was just beginning. The pact was signed in blood and ink, but the real a cavern of echoes where every cry bounced off the marble floors and high ceilings. 3 months had passed since the hospital, since the promise made on bended knee beside the bed, but the weight of those months felt like years. The nursery was a vast room at the end of the east wing, painted in soft creams and grays, filled with 4 cribs that stood in a perfect square like a formation of soldiers. Elena moved through the room in the dim light of the nightlight, a ghost in her own home, her movements practiced and automatic. She was tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep no longer fixed, a weariness that settled into her marrow. It was 3 a.m, the hour when the world was darkest and the mind was most vulnerable. One of the babies began to cry, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the quiet. Before Elena could reach him, another joined in, then a third, until the room was filled with a symphony of distress. She moved to the first crib, lifting the small bundle, rocking him gently against her shoulder. "Shoo, I'm here," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "I'm here, Leo." But even as she soothed him, another cry erupted from the corner. There were 4 of them. There was only one of her. And there was no one else. The nanny agency had sent women, competent and kind, but they left at 6 in the evening. They had lives, families, homes to return to. Elena had no home to return to. She was already there, trapped in the golden cage Arthur had built. She had dismissed the night nurse after the first week. She wanted to do it herself. She wanted to feel connected to them, to know their rhythms, to be the constant in their shifting world. But tonight, the solitude felt less like a choice and more like a sentence. She paced the floor, 1 baby in her arms, 3 crying in their cribs, her heart hammering against her ribs with a frantic rhythm that matched theirs. Her phone buzzed on the changing table, the screen lighting up the dark room with a harsh blue glare. Arthur. He was calling from Singapore. It was afternoon there, the sun shining on a world that was moving forward while she stood still in the dark. She hesitated, looking at the crying infants, then at the phone. She couldn't ignore him. Ignoring him felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that the distance between them had become a canyon. She shifted the baby to one arm and swiped the screen with her free hand, putting it on speaker so she could keep rocking. "Arthur," she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Elena," his voice came through, crisp and clear, surrounded by the faint hum of a busy office background. "I was just thinking about you. How is everything?" The report from the household manager said the heating system was fixed. "Is it warm enough for them?" Elena closed her eyes for a second, leaning her head against the cool wall. He was asking about the heating. He was not asking about her. He was not asking about the sleepless nights or the way her hands shook from caffeine and fatigue. "It's warm, Arthur. The house is fine. The babies are. They're waking up. All of them. All 4. There was a pause, a shuffle of papers on his end. "That's difficult. Have you considered the schedule matrix I sent? The one from the specialist? If you stagger the feedings by 15 minutes, you might get more contiguous rest." Elena looked down at the baby in her arms, who was finally calming, his eyes heavy and blinking. She looked at the others, who were still wailing, their little faces red and scrunched. A matrix. He had sent a spreadsheet for their children. A hot tear slipped down her cheek, landing on the baby's blanket. "It's not a machine, Arthur. They don't run on a matrix. They cry when they need me. And I need to be there." I know, Arthur said, his voice softening slightly, though the background noise of an assistant speaking in the distance distracted him. "I just want to help. I want to optimize things for you. I'm sending a new chef tomorrow. Someone who can handle the dietary requirements. And I've looked into boarding schools for the future, top tier, obviously. We need to plan ahead." "Boarding schools," Elena repeated, the words sounding absurd in the quiet nursery. They are 3 months old, Arthur. They need diapers, not endowments. Don't be difficult, Elena, he said, the stress of his own day bleeding into his tone. I'm trying to secure their future. I'm in meetings 18 hours a day. I'm doing this so they can have options. So you don't have to worry. I am not worried about money, she said, her voice rising slightly, causing the baby in her arms to stir. She lowered her voice again, forcing calm. I am worried about being alone. I am worried that when they say their first word, you will be on a plane. I am worried that they will know your voice only through a speaker. There was a silence on the other end, long and heavy. For a moment, she thought he might understand. She thought he might say he was coming home. I'll be back in 6 weeks, Arthur said finally. The merger is almost complete. Then I'll take a week off. We can go to the villa in France. 6 weeks, Elena repeated. The number hung in the air, a countdown to nothing. In 6 weeks, the babies would be different. They would smile more, roll over, change. He would miss it all. Okay, she said softly. 6 weeks. I love you, Elena, he said, and she believed he meant it. He loved her in the abstract, as the keeper of his home, the mother of his heirs. Tell them I love them. They're asleep, Arthur. Mostly. Wake one up, he joked lightly. Let me say hi. Elena looked at the baby in her arms, finally drifting off, his eyelashes dark against his pale cheeks. To wake him would be cruel. To deny Arthur would be difficult. No, she said firmly. Let him sleep. Good night, Arthur. Elena, good night. She ended the call before he could argue. She placed the phone face down on the table, the screen going dark. The room was quiet again, save for the soft sniffles of the remaining babies. She moved to the next crib, lifting another child, humming a lullaby that her own mother had sung to her, a song of comfort and presence. She walked the floor, back and forth, the rug soft under her bare feet. The house felt enormous around her. Every portrait on the wall, every piece of modern art, every expensive fixture screamed of success, but none of it offered warmth. She realized then that the pact they had made in the hospital was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. Arthur was building the fortress, yes. The walls were high, the gates were strong, the treasury was full. But she was the one living inside the walls, guarding the keep alone. She was becoming the sole architect of their emotional lives. She looked at the 4 cribs. They were so small, so dependent. They didn't know about stock markets or mergers. They knew warmth. They knew heartbeat. They knew smell. And Arthur was becoming a stranger to them, a voice on a phone, a name mentioned in passing. A pang of guilt hit her, sharp and sudden. Was she keeping him away? Was her resentment building a wall of its own? She stopped pacing, holding the second baby close. She wanted him to be here. She wanted him to feel the weight of this tiny life, to understand that this was the legacy, not the bank account. But he wasn't here, and wishing wouldn't bring him. She walked to the window, looking out at the dark silhouette of the city below. Somewhere out there, Arthur was sitting in a high-rise just like this one, signing papers, believing he was protecting them. They were both working in their own ways. He was fighting for their security. She was fighting for their souls. And the years were ticking by, second by second, binding her to these children in a way that excluded him. The bond was forming in the quiet hours, in the feedings, in the soothing touches. It was a bond of necessity and love, forged in the fire of solitude. She turned back to the room, placing the second baby down gently. He settled. She moved to the third. The night stretched out before her, endless and dark. She would survive it. She had survived the birth. She would survive the nights. But she knew, with a sinking certainty, that every night she spent alone here was another brick in the wall between her and her husband. The fortress was secure, but the home was becoming her kingdom alone. She sat in the rocking chair, waiting for the 4th baby to wake, listening to the hum of the house, waiting for a morning that felt like it would never come. The distance was no longer just physical. It was becoming structural, woven into the very foundation of their family. And as the first slightly from fatigue. The house was decorated in a theme of soft blues and whites, banners stretching across the high ceilings that read "Happy First Birthday." The letters bold and cheerful against the stark modernity of the architecture. The air smelled of vanilla and baked sugar, a warm, domestic scent that fought against the cold sterility of the marble walls. The 4 boys were awake, dressed in matching outfits of crisp white shirts and navy suspenders, sitting in their high chairs arranged around the long table. They babbled to each other, a language of coos and giggles that only they understood, their eyes bright with the simple joy of existence. Elena stepped back to admire the table, her hands resting on the back of a chair that remained empty. The head of the table. Arthur's seat. It was perfectly aligned, the napkin folded precisely, the silverware gleaming, waiting for a guest who had promised to arrive. He had called last week, his voice clear and confident over the line. "I will be there, Elena. I have cleared the schedule. Nothing is more important than this." She had wanted to believe him. She had told the boys every day since. "Daddy is coming home for your birthday." She had let herself hope, letting the expectation bloom in her chest like a flower seeking light. But now, as the clock on the wall ticked past noon, the light in the room seemed to dim, the shadows lengthening despite the sun outside. The doorbell rang, a sharp chime that made Elena jump. She hurried to the entrance, her heart fluttering with a sudden surge of adrenaline. Maybe he was early. Maybe he had surprised her. She opened the heavy oak door, but instead of her husband, there stood a delivery man in a uniform, holding a clipboard. Behind him, a truck idled, the engine rumbling low. "Delivery for the Sterling residence," the man said, checking his list. "4 crates. Marked fragile." Elena's shoulders slumped, the air leaving her lungs in a quiet sigh. "Just leave them in the foyer," she said, her voice flat. They spent the next 20 minutes carrying in boxes wrapped in expensive paper, tied with silk ribbons. She tore one open while the boys watched from their high chairs, their eyes wide. Inside was a custom-made wooden playset, imported from Germany, worth more than most people's cars. Another box contained hand-stitched leather boots that they wouldn't need for years. The third held a trust fund document, framed, declaring a sum of money that secured their lives until adulthood. The fourth was empty, save for a note. "I'm sorry. London. Merger. Love, Dad." She held the note in her hand, the paper thick and textured, expensive stock that felt cold against her skin. The boys banged their plastic spoons on their trays, waiting for the cake, waiting for the song, waiting for the father who was supposed to sing it with them. Elena looked at the gifts, piled high like a fortress wall, blocking the view of the door. He had sent them everything money could buy. He had sent them security, comfort, luxury. But he had not sent himself. The silence in the house grew heavier, pressing against her eardrums. She walked back to the dining room, the note crumpled in her fist. Her phone buzzed on the sideboard. The screen lit up with his name. She stared at it for a moment, the vibration humming against the wood, before picking it up. She didn't move to the window this time. She stayed in the center of the room, surrounded by her sons. "Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he was expecting. "Elena," Arthur's voice came through, sounding distant, wrapped in the echo of a large conference room. "I see the delivery confirmed. Did the playset arrive intact? I know the shipping was last minute." "The playset is here," Elena said, looking at the boys who were now starting to fuss, sensing her tension. "The boys are here too. They're wearing the suits you sent. They look very handsome." Good, Arthur said, relief evident in his tone. "I wanted them to have the best. I know I'm not there, but I want you to know I'm thinking of them. Every second. This deal in London, it's the key to the European expansion. It secures their inheritance, Elena. It's for them." Elena closed her eyes, a sharp pain blooming behind her eyelids. "Is it?" she asked softly. "Because they don't know what inheritance is, Arthur. They know cake. They know songs. They know who holds them when they cry. Today, they learned that Daddy sends boxes." There was a pause on the other end, the silence stretching thin. "Don't do this," Arthur said, his voice tightening. "Not today. I'm trying to give them a life you don't have to worry about. I'm sacrificing my time so they never have to sacrifice theirs. Why can't you see that?" "Because time is the only thing we can't buy back," Elena replied, her voice gaining strength, trembling with the force of held-back tears. "You can buy them schools. You can buy them houses. You can buy them safety. But you cannot buy them a father. Today was today, Arthur. It happens once. Next year they will be different. They won't need you to hold them the same way. You are saving for a future that might not exist, while spending the present that is right here." "I will make it up," Arthur insisted, the sound of papers shuffling in the background distracting from his words. "I'll take them to Disney. I'll buy the plane. Just please, Elena. Don't ruin the day. Cut the cake. Send me pictures." Elena looked at the 4 faces staring up at her. One of them, Leo, reached his hand out toward the empty chair, babbling ditto with a hopeful lilt. The sound broke something inside her, a small fracture in the heart she had been protecting. She didn't send pictures. She didn't argue further. "We are cutting the cake now," she said quietly. Goodbye, Arthur. She ended the call before he could respond. She placed the phone face down on the table, the screen darkening like a closed eye. She lit the single candle on the cake, the flame flickering in the still air. She leaned down and helped the boys blow it out, their little cheeks puffing with effort. Happy birthday, she whispered, her voice cracking. There was no applause from the other end of the table. No deep voice joining the song. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft breathing of her children. She served the cake, wiping crumbs from their chins, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. The gifts sat in the corner, towering and silent. They looked less like presents and more like evidence. Evidence of a trade-off she hadn't agreed to. She had agreed to build the home while he built the fortress, but she hadn't agreed to live in the fortress alone. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playset he had sent. The boys played with the wooden blocks, stacking them up and knocking them down, laughing with pure delight. They didn't know what was missing. They only knew what was present. And what was present was her. Elena sat on the floor with them, her back against the leg of the empty chair. She watched them, memorizing the way their noses crinkled when they smiled, the way their hair curled at the nape of their necks. She realized then that the bond between them was tightening, woven from the threads of his absence. Every time he chose the deal over the day, he was unknowingly stitching her closer to the children, making her their entire world. She was becoming the sun around which they orbited, while Arthur became a distant star, bright but cold, visible only through the telescope of money. When night fell, she bathed them and put them to bed, singing the lullaby again. She tucked them in, one by one, kissing their foreheads. He loves you, she whispered to the sleeping forms, a mantra for herself as much as for them. He just doesn't know how to show it yet. But as she walked out of the nursery and closed the door, leaving them in the dark, she looked down the hallway toward the front door. The boxes were still there. She walked over and picked up the framed trust fund document. She looked at the numbers, the zeros stacking up into infinity. It was a fortune. It was safety. It was a prison. She placed it back on the pile and turned off the lights. The house returned to silence, the party over, the decorations beginning to sag. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that mirrored the stars above. Somewhere out there, Arthur was closing a deal, feeling the rush of victory, believing he had won something for his family. But here, in the quiet of the home he paid for but never occupied, the victory felt hollow. The first year was over. The pact had held, but the cost was becoming clear. She placed her hand on the glass, feeling the cold seep into her palm. The years that bound them together were ticking away, and she wondered how many more birthdays could be celebrated with gifts instead of hugs before the distance became too wide to bridge. She turned away, ended with the same empty chair at the head of the table. The house had grown louder, filled with the chaotic energy of 4 6-year-old boys, who ran through the halls like a storm front, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings, yet the core of the home remained unchanged. The silence of the father was a permanent resident, woven into the architecture just as surely as the steel beams. Elena sat at the kitchen island, the granite cool under her elbows, watching her sons work. They were coloring paper cards, their tongues poking out in concentration, crayons scratching against cardstock. It was Father's Day, a day that felt less like a celebration and more like an annual exercise in damage control. Leo, the most sensitive of the four, stopped coloring. He looked up at Elena, his eyes the same shade of deep brown as Arthur's, a reminder that struck her heart every time she looked at him. He held up a card that was mostly blue, with a stick figure standing far away from a house. "Mom," he said, his voice small in the vast room. "Why does Dad live in his phone?" Elena paused, the knife she was using to slice apples hovering in midair. The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. The other 3 boys stopped coloring too, looking up, waiting for an answer they had all been too young to articulate until now. She placed the knife down slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She had rehearsed this answer 1,000 times in her head, but saying it out loud always tasted like ash. She walked around the island and crouched down beside Leo, bringing herself to his eye level. She wanted to lie. She wanted to say that his father was a superhero saving the world, but she couldn't. They deserved the truth, even if it was too heavy for their small shoulders. "He doesn't live in the phone, sweetheart," Elena said softly, smoothing his hair. "He lives in the city. But his work is very big. It takes up a lot of his time. But Timmy's dad works too, Leo countered, his brow furrowing. Timmy's dad comes to soccer practice. He comes to dinner. Why doesn't Dad come to school? Elena felt a tightness in her chest, a familiar ache that had settled there over the years. She looked at the other boys. They were watching her, waiting for permission to be disappointed. Some jobs are different, Leo. Dad builds things. Big buildings. Companies. He says he does it to take care of us. Does he love the buildings more? Another boy, Sam, asked. He was blunt, practical, already showing the analytical mind of his father, but without the coldness. Elena took a breath, steadying herself. No, he loves us. But sometimes people get confused about how to show love. He thinks giving us things is the same as being here. But it's not, Leo whispered, looking back down at his card. He drew a line between the stick figure and the house, making the distance wider. It's not the same. Before Elena could respond, the landline on the counter rang. The sound was sharp, intrusive. The boys flinched. They knew that ring. It was the sound of the outside world breaking into their sanctuary. Elena stood up, her knees cracking slightly, and walked to the phone. She looked at the caller ID. Arthur. Of course. He never missed a deadline, even this one. She picked up the receiver, keeping her voice low so the boys wouldn't hear the tension. Arthur, she said. Elena. His voice was bright, energetic, filled with the false confidence of a man who thought he could fix anything with a transaction. Happy Father's Day to me, I suppose. Did the gifts arrive? I sent a new gaming console for each of them. Top of the line. And I booked a trip for us. Aspen. Next month. Just us. Elena closed her eyes, leaning against the counter. The boys were watching her again. They could see the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders dropped. They are here, Arthur. They are making cards for you. Cards, he chuckled, a sound that lacked warmth. That's sweet. Tell them I'll frame them. Put them in the office, next to the merger agreements. They asked about you today, Elena said, her voice tightening. They asked why you don't come to school. They asked if you love the buildings more than them. There was a silence on the other end, brief but noticeable. The background noise of his office faded as he presumably stepped away from his team. Elena, don't put that on me. You know what I'm building. It's for their future. When they are older, they will understand. They will thank me. They are 6, Arthur, she said, her voice rising slightly, forcing her to lower it again. They don't want a future they have to wait for. They want a father today. They want you to see them kick a ball. They want you to smell their hair when you hug them, not smell the phone screen. I can't just stop, Arthur said, his voice becoming defensive, the stress leaking through. The company relies on me. Thousands of jobs, Elena. If I step back, things fall apart. I am doing this for them. Why do you keep sabotaging this? Why do you make me feel like the villain? Because someone has to tell them the truth, she replied, looking at Leo, who had gone back to coloring. But his strokes were harder, angrier. I am not sabotaging you. I am protecting them from the disappointment you keep sending in boxes. You send gifts, Arthur. You don't send yourself. I am sending myself, he insisted. I am working myself to the bone for them. Is that not sacrifice? Is my time not valuable? Your time is valuable, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But so is theirs. And you are stealing theirs. You are stealing the years when they still want you to hold their hand. I'll be there for Aspen, Arthur said, dismissing the argument as he always did, retreating into logistics. I'll make it up. Tell them I love them. Tell them Dad is a hero. Elena looked at the boys. They were not looking at heroes. They were looking at a mother who looked tired. I will tell them you called, she said. Goodbye, Arthur. She hung up the phone before he could say anything else. The silence returned, heavier than before. She walked back to the island and sat down among them. She picked up a crayon. Can I help? She asked. Leo looked at her. Did he say he was coming? Elena hesitated. The truth was a sharp thing. No, Leo. He is working. Leo nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing else. He finished his card. He didn't write, I love you. He wrote, please come home. He folded the card and placed it in an envelope. The other boys followed suit, their movements somber. The joy of the holiday had evaporated, replaced by a quiet resignation that no 6-year-old should know. Elena watched them, her heart breaking into pieces that she knew she would have to glue back together tomorrow and the day after. She realized then that the pact was shifting again. Arthur was becoming a myth to them, a figure of authority who provided but did not nurture. She was becoming the only reality. The years were binding her to them not just through love, but through necessity. They were learning to rely on her exclusively, and in doing so, they were drifting away from him. The gap was no longer just physical. It was becoming emotional, a chasm that gifts could not bridge. Later that night, after the cards were mailed and the consoles remained unopened in their boxes, Elena tucked them in. She sat on the edge of Leo's bed. "He does love you," she said, repeating the mantra. "I know," Leo said, pulling the covers up. "But love is being here, Mom. You taught us that." Elena kissed his forehead, tears finally spilling over, hot and silent. She walked out of the room, closing the door softly. She stood in the hallway, looking at the family portraits on the wall. In the photos, Arthur was there, smiling, but in the life behind the photos, he was a ghost. The years were passing, ticking away on the clock in the hall. She wondered how many more Father's Days they could endure before the boys stopped asking, before they stopped hoping. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Arthur was working, believing he was winning. But here, in the dark, she knew the truth. He was losing them, 1 year at a time. And she was the only one who could see it happening, powerless to stop the slow drift of a family pulling apart at the seams. The bond between her and the Quadruplets tightened, a knot pulled by the tension of his absence, companion. The office, once a sanctuary of power, now felt like a cage, the silence amplified by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. On the desk, the phone lay silent for the moment, but he knew it would ring again. It always did. The crisis had begun at dawn, a ripple in the market that had grown into a tidal wave by noon, threatening to swallow the empire he had built brick by brick. Liquidity was drying up. Investors were panicking. The rumors were spreading like wildfire, and if they weren't contained, the fallout would be catastrophic. He walked to the desk and poured a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. He hated the tremor. It was a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor he presented to the world. He drank the water quickly, the cold liquid doing little to soothe the heat rising in his chest. He thought of Elena. He thought of the boys. They were at home, probably asleep, or perhaps waiting for him. He had promised to attend the school play tonight. Leo had a speaking role. He had promised. But the phone had rung at 4 in the afternoon, and the promise had evaporated like mist in the sun. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, his finger hovering over the send button for a moment before he pressed it. It rang twice before she answered. Her voice was soft, tired, lacking the surprise he hoped for. "Arthur," she said. No question of where he was. She knew. "Elena," he said, his voice rough. I can't make it tonight. The situation here, it's worse than we thought. If I leave now, the stock could tank by morning. I have to stay." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for him to hear the quiet of the house behind her, the absence of his own voice in their home. "I know," she said finally. "Leo asked about you. He saved you a seat in the front row." Arthur closed his eyes, a sharp pain piercing his heart. "I know. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I'm fixing things. For them. For all of us." "He knows, Arthur," Elena replied, her voice devoid of anger, which was somehow worse. It was resignation. "They all know. They understand that work is more important. They are learning to live without you." "Don't say that," he snapped, the defensiveness rising instantly. "I am doing this so they don't have to live without security. Do you think I want to be here? Do you think I enjoy missing this? I am fighting a war, Elena. Every minute I spend here is a minute I keep the wolves from the door." "Then fight," she said softly. "But don't expect them to cheer when you win if you fight alone." The line went dead. Arthur lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The words echoed in the empty room. "Fight alone." He slammed the phone down on the desk, the sound cracking through the silence. He wasn't fighting alone. He had an army of employees, advisors, lawyers. But he knew what she meant. He was fighting the battle for his family alone, without them, and potentially against their understanding. He walked to the window again, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The city below was a sea of lights, millions of people living lives of connection, while he stood above them, isolated in his tower. The door opened behind him. Marcus stepped in, holding a tablet, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Arthur," he said, his voice urgent. "The board is on the line. They want to know if we're liquidating the Asian assets. It's the only way to cover the shortfall immediately. But if we do that, we lose the foothold in the market. It sets us back 10 years. Arthur turned around, his eyes hardening. The vulnerability he had felt moments ago was buried under layers of command. "No," he said firmly. "We don't liquidate. We leverage the real estate holdings, the commercial properties, put them up as collateral for the bridge loan." Marcus hesitated, shifting his weight. "Arthur, those properties, that's the personal portfolio. That's the safety net for the family. If the market turns again, you could lose the estates. You could lose the house." Arthur didn't flinch. He walked back to the desk, leaning over it, his hands planted firmly on the wood. "Do it," he said. "I don't care about the house. I care about the company. If the company falls, everything falls. The house is just walls. The company is the legacy." "It's risky," Marcus warned. Elena understands," Arthur lied, the words tasting bitter. "She knows what's at stake. Just execute the order. I need the funds by morning." Marcus nodded slowly, sensing the finality in Arthur's tone. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You should go home, Arthur. Even for an hour. Sleep." "There's no time," Arthur said, picking up a pen. "Go." When the door closed, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. He sat down in the leather chair, the material creaking under his weight. He opened the file in front of him, the numbers blurring slightly. He blinked, forcing his eyes to focus. He thought about the house. The house where the boys were growing up. The house where Elena waited. He was risking it all to save the entity that kept him away from them. The irony was not lost on him, but he pushed it aside. It was necessary. It was the only way. If he lost the company, he was nothing. And if he was nothing, he couldn't protect them. He picked up his phone again, not to call Elena, but to open the photo gallery. He scrolled through the images, most of them sent by Elena over the years. There was a picture of the boys at 5, standing in front of the school gate. They were smiling, but their eyes were looking past the camera, looking for someone who wasn't there. There was a picture of Leo at the piano, his hands on the keys, looking expectantly at the empty seat in the audience. Arthur zoomed in on the empty seat. It was just a blur of color, but it felt like a void. He traced the screen with his finger, wishing he could reach through the glass and touch them. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered to the empty room. "So you never have to worry." But the room didn't answer. The rain continued to beat against the window, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. He felt a tightness in his chest, a physical manifestation of the stress, but he ignored it. Pain was irrelevant. Fatigue was irrelevant. Only the survival of the empire mattered. He opened the document for the bridge loan, his hands steady as he began to review the terms. He would sign away the safety net. He would gamble the home to keep the business alive. It was a logical decision. It was the decision a CEO made. It was the decision a father made to ensure his children inherited a kingdom, not a ruin. But as he read the clauses, the words seemed to shift on the page. Collateral, risk, liability. They weren't just financial terms anymore. They were measurements of his life. He was collateralizing his presence for their future. He was leveraging his relationship for their security. He paused, the pen hovering over the signature line. For a moment, just a fleeting second, he considered putting the pen down. He considered walking out of the office, driving home, and sitting in the dark with his sleeping sons. He imagined waking them up, just to tell them he was there. He imagined Elena's face if he walked through the door tonight. But the phone buzzed again. A message from the board. Status. The moment passed. The weakness vanished. He signed the document, the ink flowing dark and permanent. He had chosen. He had chosen the legacy over the moment. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The deal was secured. The company would survive another day. But as he looked out at the storm, he felt a coldness settle in his bones that had nothing to do with the weather. He had saved the fortress, but he wondered if there would be anyone left inside it to welcome him when the war was finally over. The years were binding him to this chair, to this desk, to this life of isolation, and he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that the cost was higher than any number on a spreadsheet. He turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save the shuffling of small feet on hardwood, and escalated quickly into a roar of energy that shook the very foundations of the house. 6 a.m. The sun was barely a gray smear behind the heavy curtains. But the day had already begun. Elena opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling, her body feeling as though it had been filled with lead overnight. She had slept technically, but it was a fragmented, shallow sleep, punctuated by the habit of listening for cries that no longer came, replaced now by the demands of school schedules and soccer practices. She sat up, the movement sending a sharp spike of pain through her temples, a headache that had been blooming since yesterday evening. She swung her legs out of bed, her feet finding the cold floor, and took a deep breath. She had to be ready. She had to be perfect. Arthur expected perfection. The house had to be a sanctuary, the children well-fed and dressed, the chaos managed invisibly. That was her role in the pact. She walked to the bathroom and splashed water on her face, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide, and her skin had lost its glow, replaced by a pale tightness. She touched her cheek, feeling the warmth of stress beneath the skin. "Just today," she whispered to the mirror. "Just get through today." She tied her hair back, pulled on a robe, and stepped out into the hallway. The noise hit her like a physical wave. For boys were already downstairs, their voices echoing off the marble walls, arguing over who got the blue cup, who had the red backpack. The air smelled of burnt toast and spilled orange juice. Elena descended the stairs, forcing a smile onto her face before she reached the bottom step. She couldn't let them see the fatigue. They needed energy, not a mother who looked like she was about to collapse. "Good morning," she called out, her voice brighter than she felt. The boys turned, a whirlwind of limbs and noise. "Mom, Leo pushed me," Sam shouted, pointing an accusing finger. "Did not," Leo retorted, his face flushed. "Shoes," Elena said, keeping her tone calm, though her heart was already racing. "Everyone find their shoes. Breakfast is ready." She walked into the kitchen, the scene of the crime. Milk was pooling on the counter, dripping onto the floor. Toast was blackened in the toaster. She grabbed a towel and began wiping, the motion mechanical. Her hands were trembling slightly, a fine vibration she couldn't control. She took a pill from her pocket, a painkiller she had started keeping there recently, and swallowed it dry. "Mom, I can't find my left shoe," one of the others called from the foyer. "Check under the bench," she replied, not turning around. She scrubbed at the milk stain, but it seemed to spread. Her vision blurred for a second, the room tilting slightly to the left. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, waiting for the dizziness to pass. It was just exhaustion. It had to be. She couldn't be sick. There was no one to take over. The nanny came at 8, but the morning rush was hers alone. Arthur was somewhere in a time zone where it was night, sleeping in a hotel bed she hadn't seen in months, or working in an office like the one he described in hushed, urgent tones. Her phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating against the marble. She glanced at it. Arthur. Of course. He had a sixth sense for timing, calling when the chaos was at its peak. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath to steady her voice, and answered. She couldn't tell him about the milk. She couldn't tell him about the headache. She couldn't tell him that she felt like she was drowning in a house that was too big for one person. "Arthur," she said, leaning against the counter for support. "Elena," his voice was crisp, awake, energized. "I wanted to check in. The markets are volatile today. I might be unreachable for a few days. Going off-grid for the negotiations." "Okay," she said, watching Leo run past the kitchen door without his shoes. "We'll be fine." "I know you will," Arthur said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice, which made it hurt more. "I'm moving some assets around. Protecting the downside. I wanted to make sure the bills are paid. The accountants have everything set up." "The bills are paid, Arthur," she said, her voice tight. She watched Sam trip over a backpack in the hallway. He didn't cry, just got up and kept running. They were learning to be tough. They were learning to not need help. "The house is running." "Good," Arthur said. "I worry about you. With the 4 of them. It's a lot of logistics." Logistics. He called their lives logistics. Elena closed her eyes for a second, the pain behind them throbbing. "It's not logistics, Arthur. It's life. But we are managing." "I'll send something," he said quickly. "A service. Someone to help with the mornings." "We don't need a service," she said, perhaps too sharply. A drop of milk fell from the counter onto her foot. She didn't wipe it away. "We need consistency. We need, never mind." "What?" he asked. "Tell me." "Nothing," she lied. The lie tasted like copper in her mouth. "Just have a safe trip. Don't worry about us." "I always worry," he said. "That's why I work." "I know," she whispered. "I know." She ended the call before he could hear the crack in her voice. She placed the phone down gently, as if it were made of glass. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, the boys having moved to the foyer to put on their shoes. Elena leaned her forehead against the cool marble of the counter, closing her eyes. The silence was heavy, pressing against her chest. She felt a tear slip out, hot and fast, tracking through the powder on her cheek. She didn't sob. She didn't have the energy for sobbing. It was just a single leak in the dam she had built around herself. "Mom!" She jumped, wiping her face quickly with the back of her hand before turning around. Leo was standing in the doorway, holding his shoes. He looked at her, his eyes wide and searching. He was too perceptive. He saw everything. "Are you okay?" he asked. Elena straightened her spine, pulling the mask back into place. She smiled, and this time she put all her remaining energy into making it reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Did you find your shoes?" "Yes," he said, but he didn't move. He took a step closer, reaching out to touch her arm. His hand was small, warm, and solid. "You work hard too, Mom." The simple statement broke something open inside her, a floodgate of emotion she had to immediately clamp shut. She knelt down, ignoring the protest of her knees, and hugged him. She held him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, shampoo, and sleep. "I do," she whispered into his shoulder. "I do work hard." "Is Dad working hard too?" he asked, the question innocent but loaded. "Yes," she said, pulling back and smoothing his hair. "He is working very hard." "Okay," Leo said, accepting the answer as he always did, because he had no other choice. "We have to go or we'll be late." Elena stood up, the dizziness returning for a fleeting second. She steadied herself on the chair. "Go get your brothers. I'll drive." She watched him run off, joining the whirlwind again. She looked around the kitchen. The milk was still on the floor. The toast was still burnt. The phone was still dark. She walked over to the spill and wiped it up, the paper towel soaking up the white liquid until it was heavy and sodden. She threw it in the trash. She picked up the burnt toast and scraped it into the bin. She moved through the motions, efficient and precise. She was the manager of this household, the CEO of this family. Arthur managed the money, she managed the life. But as she grabbed her keys and walked to the foyer where the boys were waiting, lined up like soldiers, she felt a hollowness in her chest that no amount of efficiency could fill. She herded them into the car, buckling seatbelts, checking backpacks. "Everyone ready?" she asked, looking in the rearview mirror. Four faces looked back. They were healthy. They were safe. They were loved. But they were waiting for something she couldn't give them alone. She put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway, the gates closing behind them with a solid thud. As she drove down the winding road toward the school, the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the dashboard. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. They were steady now. The tremor had stopped. She had suppressed it. She had hidden it. But she knew it would come back. It would come back tomorrow, and the day after. The exhaustion was cumulative, a debt she was accruing with no way to pay it off. Arthur was risking the house for the company, but she was risking herself for the family. And she wondered, as the school gates came into view, how long she could keep standing before the foundation cracked. She parked the car and turned off the engine. The silence returned. She took a moment, just one moment, to close her eyes and breathe. Then she opened them, opened the door, and stepped out into the light, ready to do it all again. The years were binding her to this routine, to this sacrifice, and she knew that with every day she endured alone, the bond between her and the boys grew stronger, while the bond with Arthur grew thinner, stretched across miles and misunderstandings until it was almost beside her, for empty chairs waited. No, not four. One was for her. The other three were for the boys. But there was a fifth space, deliberately left open at the end of the row. A space for Arthur. She had saved it. She had told the boys he would be there. She had looked into their eyes that morning, eyes wide with a hope that terrified her, and she had lied. "He's trying," she had said. "He wants to be there." The lights dimmed, plunging the audience into a twilight blue, and a hush fell over the room. The curtain rose, revealing the fourth-grade class arranged in rows. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird seeking escape. She scanned the faces instantly, finding them without effort. Leo, Sam, and the two others stood in the front line, wearing matching blue tunics. They looked so small under the harsh stage lights, so vulnerable. As the music began, a soft piano melody, the boys began to sing. Their voices were clear, harmonizing surprisingly well, but Elena wasn't listening to the notes. She was watching their eyes. Every few seconds, during the instrumental breaks, their gazes swept across the front row. They looked at her, smiled briefly, and then looked to the right, to the empty chair. They looked again, and again. Leo's voice wavered for a moment, his eyes locking onto the empty space where his father should have been sitting. He blinked, quickly looking back at the conductor, swallowing hard. Sam nudged Leo's arm, whispering something, pointing to the chair. Leo shook his head slightly, forcing a smile back onto his face, but the light in his eyes dimmed. Elena felt the shift from her seat, a physical drop in the atmosphere around them. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to run to the stage and hug them, to tell them it didn't matter, that she was enough. But she stayed seated, frozen by the weight of the promise broken once again. The song ended. The applause was polite, warm, but Elena barely heard it. She was watching the boys as they filed off the stage. She saw Leo stop at the wings, looking back at the audience one last time. He didn't wave. He just turned and disappeared behind the curtain. Elena stood up, her legs feeling unsteady, and made her way to the backstage entrance. The hallway was crowded with parents congratulating their children, hugging them, lifting them up. She found her sons huddled together near a water cooler, away from the crowd. They had changed out of their costumes into their regular clothes, sitting on a bench with their backpacks at their feet. She approached them slowly. "You were wonderful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "So beautiful." Leo looked up at her. His eyes were dry but red-rimmed. "Did you see?" he asked. "I saw everything," Elena said, kneeling in front of them. "You were perfect." "Did he see?" Sam asked. The question was blunt, hanging in the air between them. The other two boys looked down at their shoes. Elena took a breath. She had her phone in her hand. She had called him 3 times during the performance. Voicemail. She had texted him. "They're on now." No response. She looked at her sons, at the 4 faces that were mirrors of the man who wasn't here. She couldn't lie again. "Not today." "No," she said softly. "He couldn't come." "Why?" Leo asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. A 6-year-old shouldn't sound tired. "He had a meeting," Elena said, the words tasting like ash. "A very important one." "More important than us?" Sam asked. Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. She stood up, brushing off her knees. "Let's go home. I made cake." They walked to the car in silence. The usual chatter, the arguments over who sat where, the jokes about the performance, all of it was gone. The car felt like a tomb. Elena started the engine, the sound loud in the quiet vehicle. She drove out of the school parking lot, merging into the afternoon traffic. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. "Arthur." Finally. She let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker so the boys could hear, though she immediately regretted it. She wanted to protect them, but she also wanted him to hear what his absence sounded like. "Arthur," she said, her voice flat. "Elena," he sounded rushed, background noise of voices and shuffling papers surrounding his voice. "I saw the texts. I'm so sorry. The board meeting went over. We were finalizing the merger. I couldn't step out. Did it go well?" Elena gripped the steering wheel, her nails digging into the leather. She glanced at the rearview mirror. Leo was looking out the window, watching the city blur by. "They sang, Arthur. They looked for you. Every minute." I know," Arthur said, his voice defensive now. "I told you the situation is critical. If I walk away, the stock drops. Do you want me to lose the company? Do you want them to grow up with nothing?" "They have everything," Elena said, her voice rising, causing Sam to look up from the back seat. "They have clothes. They have school. They have a house. They don't have a father. There is a difference." "Don't do this," Arthur snapped. "Not now. I'm trying to secure their future. You think this is easy for me? Do you think I want to miss this? I am sacrificing my life for them." "No," Elena said, the truth finally breaking free, sharp and clear. "You are sacrificing them for your life. There is a difference. You are building a legacy, Arthur, but you are forgetting the heirs. They are right here, and you are missing them." There was a silence on the other end. For a moment, the background noise seemed to fade. "I'll make it up," he said, but the conviction was gone from his voice. It sounded like a plea. "Next week. I'll take them away." "Next week they will be different," Elena said. "Today is gone. It's never coming back." "Elena, please," he said. "Don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out, Arthur. You walked out." She ended the call. She didn't wait for his response. She placed the phone face down on the dashboard. The silence in the car returned, heavier than before. She could feel the boys watching her in the mirror. They hadn't heard everything, but they had heard enough. They understood the tone. They understood the finality. She drove the rest of the way home without speaking. The house loomed ahead, large and impersonal against the gray sky. She parked the car in the driveway and turned off the engine. She didn't get out immediately. She sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the garage door. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, then another. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. Behind her, she heard a sniffle. Leo was crying. Not loudly. Just quiet, steady tears. Elena turned in her seat. "Leo," she whispered. "He doesn't want to come," Leo said, his voice thick. "He doesn't want to see us." Elena unbuckled her seatbelt and turned fully, reaching back to take his hand. "He loves you," she said, the mantra feeling hollow now. He doesn't know how to be here." "Then teach him," Sam said from the other side. "Tell him we don't want the money. We want him." Elena looked at them. For pairs of eyes looking at her, waiting for her to fix it, waiting for her to bridge the gap that had grown too wide for her to cross alone. She realized then that the pact was broken. Not by her, but by the years. The years had bound her to them, yes, but they had unbound him from the family. He was becoming a stranger who paid the bills. And she was becoming the sole parent, the sole emotional anchor. "I will tell him," Elena said, her voice firming up. "But you have to know. I am here. I am not going anywhere." "We know," Leo said, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "We have you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they saddened her. Because they shouldn't have to be enough. A mother should not have to be enough for a father too. She got out of the car and opened their doors. They walked into the house, the cake waiting on the counter untouched. The house was quiet. The gifts Arthur had sent earlier that week sat in the corner, unopened. Elena looked at them, then at her sons. She walked over to the box, picked it up, and moved it into the storage closet, out of sight. "Let's eat the cake," she said. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where the empty chair waited every night. But tonight, no one looked at the chair. They looked at each other. They shared the cake, they laughed softly at a joke Sam made, they leaned into each other. The bond was tightening, pulling them into a tight circle that excluded the outside world. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, Elena knew that something had shifted permanently. The hope was gone. The waiting was over. They had stopped expecting him to come. And in that acceptance, they had found a strength that didn't rely on him. But it was a survival strength born of necessity, not choice. And as she tucked them in that night, listening to their breathing synchronize in the dark, she wondered if Arthur would somber circle. Elena noticed the shift first. The boys, usually loud and chaotic, moving through the halls like a tropical storm, were now huddled together in whispers. They spoke in codes, passing notes folded into intricate shapes, disappearing into Leo's room for hours at a time. At first, she worried it was trouble. At 9 years old, they were old enough to get into mischief, old enough to feel the weight of the world pressing down on their small shoulders. But when she listened at the door, she didn't hear plotting or mischief. She heard planning. It was late on a Tuesday night when Elena finally decided to investigate. The house was dark, save for the soft glow of the night lights in the hallway. She walked softly, her socks muffling her steps on the carpet. She stopped outside the door of the boys' shared wing. A sliver of light spilled out from under the door. She could hear the low murmur of 4 voices, intertwined and serious. She knocked gently. The voices stopped abruptly. She opened the door. The scene before her made her heart ache. The 4 boys were huddled on the floor around a tablet, surrounded by pillows and blankets like a fort. They weren't playing a game. On the screen was a timeline of video clips. Leo looked up, his face flushed with guilt and determination. Sam held a small camera in his lap. The other 2 were sorting through drawings and papers. "Mom," Leo said, his voice small. He tried to hide the tablet screen with his hand, but stopped. "What are you doing up?" Elena asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired, but curious. "We're making something," Sam said, his voice steady. He didn't look away from her. "For Dad." Elena pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room, sitting on the edge of the bed. The room smelled of laundry detergent and boy sweat, a scent that was uniquely theirs. "For Dad," she repeated. "Is it a gift?" "It's not a gift you can wrap," Leo said. He looked at his brothers, seeking permission. They nodded. He turned the tablet toward her. "It's a video. Of us. Of the house. Of everything he misses." Elena looked at the screen. The thumbnail showed a picture of the empty chair at the dining table, taken from a low angle, as if from a child's perspective. Below it were clips labeled, morning breakfast, home time, bedtime, the quiet. Her breath caught in her throat. They weren't making a card. They were making evidence. They were documenting the void he left behind, not to accuse him, but to show him. Why? She whispered, her voice thick. Because you tell him, Leo said, his eyes shining in the dim light. But he doesn't listen. He thinks you're just sad. He doesn't know what it looks like. He doesn't know what it sounds like. Sam picked up the camera. We filmed ourselves doing homework. No one helped us. We filmed breakfast when you were tired and didn't make smiles. We filmed the chair. He pointed to the screen. We want him to see the empty space. Not to make him mad. To make him see. Elena felt a tear slide down her cheek. They were protecting her. They were taking the burden of communication off her shoulders because they knew she was too tired to fight anymore. They were uniting, not just as brothers, but as a team against the distance that separated them from their father. They were 9 years old, and they were trying to save their family. Can I see? She asked softly. Leo nodded. He pressed play. The video began. It wasn't edited professionally. It was shaky raw. It showed the kitchen table in the morning light. Elena's back was to the camera, pouring coffee, her shoulders slumped. The audio picked up the sound of the spoon stirring, the clock ticking, the silence where a father's voice should be. Then it cut to the living room. The boys were building a tower of blocks. One of them said, "Dad would like this," and the others didn't answer. They just kept building. The camera lingered on the empty space on the couch. Then it cut to the school play again, but this time from the back of the auditorium. It zoomed in on the empty chair in the front row. It held there for 10 seconds. 10 seconds of silence that felt like an hour. The video ended. The room was quiet. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at her sons. They were watching her, waiting for her verdict. They looked so grown up, their faces serious, their eyes old. It's powerful, Elena said, her voice trembling. Are you sure you want to send this? It might make him sad. We want him to be sad, Leo said firmly. Because if he's sad, maybe he'll come home. If he knows it hurts, maybe he'll stop doing it. Elena reached out and pulled Leo into a hug. Then Sam. Then the others. She held them all together, a tangle of limbs and love. You are so brave, she whispered into Leo's hair. So brave. Will you help us send it? Sam asked. We don't know his secure email. The regular one gets full. Elena pulled back, looking at their hopeful faces. She knew what this meant. She was handing them over to the truth. She was allowing them to confront the reality of their father's absence directly. But she also knew she couldn't stop them. This was their voice. This was their attempt to bridge the gap that she had been unable to cross. Yes, she said. I will help you send it. They worked together for another hour. Elena logged into the secure server Arthur used for family communications. She attached the file. She typed a subject line. What you Mississippi. She didn't write a body text. The video was the text. Her hand hovered over the send button. She looked at the boys. They were standing behind her, a solid wall of support. They nodded. She clicked send. The progress bar moved across the screen. Uploading. Sending. Delivered. The room seemed to exhale. The tension that had been holding them tight for days loosened slightly. They had done something. They had acted. They were no longer just waiting. Now we wait, Leo said. Now we wait, Elena agreed. She tucked them in one by one. They didn't ask for stories tonight. They didn't ask for promises. They just wanted to know she was there. She turned off the lights and closed the door, leaving them in the dark. She walked down the hallway to her own room, the house silent around her. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking at her own phone. She wondered what Arthur would do. Would he be angry? Would he be hurt? Or would he finally see? She thought about the video. The empty chair. The silence. It was a mirror she had been afraid to hold up to him. But her sons, they had no fear. They only had love. A love so strong it compelled them to show him the pain it caused, hoping he would fix it. She lay back on the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The years had bound her to them, yes. But tonight, she realized the years had also changed them. They were no longer just children waiting for a parent. They were partners in this struggle. They were fighting for the family, too. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification. Message received. Her heart jumped. It was too soon. It couldn't be him. She picked it up. It was just a spam email. She put it back down. The waiting had begun. The hardest part. She closed her eyes, listening to the house settle. Somewhere, in a skyscraper miles away, Arthur was likely working late. She wondered if he was thinking of them. She wondered if he felt the emptiness too, or if he had filled it with so much noise that he couldn't hear the silence anymore. She drifted off to sleep with the image of the video in her mind. The empty chair. It haunted her, but it also gave her hope. Because for the first time in years, the message hadn't come from her. It had come from them. And a father might ignore a wife's plea, but could he ignore the silent testimony of his own sons? She didn't know. But as she slept, she felt a shift in the air. The static was clearing. The storm gray haze before his eyes when the secure server alert chimed. It was a rare sound, reserved for family communications, bypassing the filters that blocked the rest of the world. He paused, his pen hovering over the ledger. He expected a message from Elena, perhaps an update on the boys' schedules or a reminder about an upcoming holiday he had already forgotten. He clicked the icon, expecting text. Instead, a file attachment appeared. Subject: What You Mississippi. The title struck him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He sat back in his leather chair, the material creaking under his weight, and stared at the screen. The cursor hovered over the play button. He felt a sudden, irrational fear, an instinct telling him not to open it, that whatever was inside would change things permanently. But curiosity, mixed with a guilt he had been suppressing for years, pushed his hand. He clicked. The video began. There was no music, no introductory title card. Just the shaky, handheld footage of a kitchen table bathed in morning light. The audio was raw, picking up the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. Elena's back was to the camera, pouring coffee. Her shoulders were slumped, the posture of a woman carrying a weight too heavy for one person. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He recognized that posture. He had seen it in the mirror sometimes, but seeing it in his home, captured by his sons, made it real. The camera panned to the table. For bowls of cereal. For spoons. One empty chair at the head. The camera lingered on the empty chair for 10 seconds. 10 seconds of silence that stretched into an eternity. Arthur felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The scene cut to the living room. The boys were building a tower of blocks. They were younger in this clip, maybe a year ago. One of them, Leo, placed a block on top and stepped back. "Dad would like this," he said to the empty room. The other boys didn't answer. They just kept building, their faces solemn. The camera zoomed in on their eyes. There was no anger there. There was only acceptance. They had accepted his absence as a fact of life, like gravity or weather. That hurt more than anger ever could. Anger implied hope for change. Acceptance meant they had stopped waiting. Arthur's hand trembled as he reached for his mouse. He wanted to pause it, to stop the evidence from accumulating, but the video continued. It showed the school play. The angle was from the back of the auditorium, far away. The camera zoomed in on the front row. He saw Elena sitting alone. He saw the space beside her where he should have been. The camera held on that empty space while the boys sang on stage. He could hear their voices, thin and brave, filling the space he had left vacant. He saw Leo look out into the audience, searching for him. The camera caught the moment Leo's eyes passed over the empty seat and moved on. The light in the boy's eyes dimmed. Arthur felt a tear hit his hand, warm and shocking. He hadn't realized he was crying. The video ended with a shot of the four of them sitting on the floor of their bedroom, huddled together. Leo looked directly into the lens. "We know you're working," he said. "But we miss you. Mom misses you. The house is too big." The screen went black. Arthur sat in the silence of his office, the only sound the ragged rhythm of his own breathing. The city lights outside seemed dimmer now, less like diamonds and more like distant stars, cold and unreachable. He looked around the room. The marble, the glass, the awards on the shelf. They looked like props in a play he had forgotten he was acting in. He had told himself for years that he was building a legacy. He had told himself that the money was the love language, the security the gift. But the video had translated his language back to him, and it sounded like abandonment. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He paced the room, his hands running through his hair, pulling at the roots. He walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. He could see the school from here, a small building in the distance. He could see the neighborhood where his home sat, dark and quiet. He had been so focused on the horizon that he had missed the ground beneath his feet. The years had passed. 9 years. They were almost 10. They were becoming men, and they were learning to be men without him. They were learning that fathers were optional. That thought stopped him cold. He turned away from the window and walked back to the desk. He picked up the phone. His hand shook so badly he dropped it once before managing to dial her number. It rang once. Twice. Elena answered on the third ring. Her voice was sleepy, thick with rest. "Arthur?" "I saw it," he said. His voice cracked, breaking in the middle of the sentence. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure, but there was no composure left to find. "I saw the video, Elena." There was a silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing change, waking up fully. "Okay," she said softly. "Did you watch it all?" "Yes," he whispered. "The chair. The school. Leo." He couldn't finish the sentence. The image of his son's dimming eyes was burned into his retina. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you show me?" "I did," Elena said, her voice gentle but firm. "I told you every day, Arthur. In 1,000 different ways. But you didn't hear me. They had to show you. They had to make you see." Arthur leaned against the desk, his legs feeling weak. I thought I was protecting them. I thought I was giving them everything." "You gave them everything except you," Elena said. "And that was the only thing they wanted. The video isn't to make you feel guilty, Arthur. It's to show you what's left. The house is full of things, but it's empty of you." Arthur closed his eyes. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, the confession tearing out of him. "I don't know how to go back." "You can't go back," Elena said. "Time doesn't work that way. You can't get those years back. You can't unmiss those birthdays. But you can be here for the next one. You can be here for tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Arthur repeated. The word felt foreign. His schedule was booked for months. Meetings in London, Tokyo, New York. Empires to manage. Deals to close. But compared to the image of the empty chair, none of it mattered. It was all dust. "I'm coming home," he said. "Tonight. I'm leaving now." "Arthur," Elena said, caution in her voice. "Don't come home if you're just going to bring the office with you. Don't come home if you're going to sit at the table and check your email while they talk to you. Come home only if you're ready to be there. Really there." "I know," he said. He looked at the stack of papers on his desk. The merger agreements. The projections. They were just paper. "I'm ready. I'm done here." "Okay," Elena said. "We'll be waiting." He hung up the phone. He didn't pack his bag. He didn't call his assistant. He walked to the door of his office and turned off the lights.